Hey, Aharon Rabinowitz here for RedGiantTV.com. In this episode of Red Giant TV, we are sitting down with Visual Effects Supervisor, we like to say Visual Effects legend, John Knoll. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down. You know, the term, let's talk about, just for a moment, I went to IMDb. Have you ever gotten to look at your own profile?
Oh, yes, I've seen it.
Yes, according to the people on IMDb, you are the go-round best. I don't know if you've ever watched Joss Whedon's series Firefly, but that's the second highest level of compliment you can get. Klingon would be the
okay.
But you've got a following there, and that's even among people who aren't visual effects artists. But within the visual effects community, you've had a tremendous amount of influence, and just the work that you do is fantastic. So I'd like to find out a little bit about you and what you do at ILM exactly. Mm-hmm. What's day to day?
Well, I'm a visual effects supervisor at ILM, and so that job involves either prepping for or doing visual effects on a motion picture. I've taken to doing the more large and complex projects, and so usually when those are underway, there's very little time to do hands-on work, and it's mostly directing the artist to try and get to where we need to go, trying to maintain quality and consistency.
Yeah, I noticed one of the movies I was really shocked to see was Confessions of a Shopaholic.
It's the story with them?
Yeah.
Well, it was a Bruckheimer production, and I'd done the Pirates films for Bruckheimer. So it was a small project. I liked the script. It was kind of amusing. They wanted me to do it. And small projects like that are really good test beds for trying new ideas. And we actually did an entirely different 3D workflow on that as an experiment. All the rendering was done in Modo, which is something different for us.
What I want to know is how did you actually get into visual effects? What inspired you to start?
Well, as a kid, I enjoyed, I loved movies, and in particular I loved the kind of movies that it was clear that you couldn't have gone out and shot them. They were fabricated in some way. You were seeing something that there was no location for that, or depicted something that was impossible or didn't exist. And the whole idea that was fabricated was fascinating to me, and I was determined to kind of learn how that was all done. And I had a couple other hobbies that sort of went along in parallel. I was into photography. I built miniatures. I did some computer programming. And all these things seem to have a nice combination in visual effects, and you sort of need all those to do visual effects. And it was something that I was, as I said, very interested in, but I wasn't really thinking about it as a career until Star Wars came out. And I was in high school when Star Wars came out, and it was suddenly there's all this exciting new stuff happening in the field. There were new technologies being introduced. There was a lot more momentum of more films being made with them.
Virtually every animator I know, it was probably Star Wars, it might have been Empire, but they're all like, I saw that and it changed my life. So I think what people really want to know, and what I would love to know, is the point between watching Star Wars and going to ILM is like, what happened that made you, that sort of drove you there?
Well, some of it was a little boldness, and some of it was just good luck and good timing. About a year after Star Wars came out, my dad had a Society of Nuclear Medicine conference in Anaheim. This was May of 1978. And he brought my brothers and I along with him. And I got out a phone book and I looked up ILM. And I called and I got Grant McCune on the phone. He's the head of the model shop. And I told him I was a model maker and I was interested in working in the industry. And he said, well, why don't you come on down and we'll show you around.
That's awesome.
And my dad, since he had this conference in Anaheim and ILM was up in Van Nuys, that was about a 45-minute to an hour drive. So relatively early in the morning, he drove me all the way up there. And he dropped me off. And then he went to his conference. And he came and picked me up kind of in the late afternoon. So I spent one whole day from early in the morning all the way till the end of the day. And they were working on Battlestar Galactica, the original TV series. And so I went to dailies in the morning, and I got toured around by Lauren Peterson, who I've since worked with on a bunch of shows. Hung around in the model shop, saw how they were doing the optical composites, how they were shooting the elements out on the stage, and it sort of blew my mind. It's one thing to read about this stuff in magazines, and another thing to witness it in person, where you see, well, these people come into work, and their job is they build these spaceships and they shoot them on the stages and they blow them up, and it's not that hard to picture yourself as one of those people, and that day pretty much sealed the deal for me, and all right, I got to do this.
So what was your first visual effects job?
Well, as I said, I originally thought I would get in as a model maker. One of my hobbies as a kid is I built 48 scale World War II fighters, and then that sort of led into scratch building. And I got to be reasonably accomplished as a model maker. And it was an easy skill to demonstrate, because you could build a portfolio of things that you'd built. And so I applied to the University of Southern California and started in the fall of 1980. And my grand scheme was that I wanted to go to school in the LA area, start getting to know people in the industry, maybe do some freelance work, so that by the time I graduated, that I would be able to get a reasonably advanced position somewhere. And so it was all very deliberate that way. And within about 2 months of moving out to California, I got my first little freelance model making job. It was a guy named Greg Jean, who's had a company doing miniatures for films, and he had a contract to build, I think, the first prototype of the Firefox from the Clint Eastwood film. And he hired me for a couple of days to come in and just help finish parts that were coming out of a mold. So I continued to do little freelance projects, anywhere from a couple of evenings or a weekend throughout my time at school. And during the summer breaks, I could take longer jobs, a couple of weeks, and to work full time for a while. And it worked out pretty well. I mean, I did get to know the model making community, and then from that I got to know a lot of the camera crews that were shooting the models that I was building. And I became more interested in doing motion control. And then by the time I had graduated USC, I'd been doing freelance motion control camera work, and that sort of led me to being hired at ILM.
I think also the fact that you came in at a time in the industry when there was a lot of motion control and also practical effects gives you that sort of, most of the visual effects animators that I know have never even been on set. They get stuff that just comes through the pipeline, and they're told to sort of put it together.
Yeah, I think having a background in real photography it's valuable. One thing I see a lot in feature films, is a pet peeve of mine, is exposure mismatches, where if you've never been out there on the stage with a light meter trying to figure out how you're going to get a good exposure split between the interior and the exterior, you don't appreciate how hard that is. And I often see composites where it's just been a green screen out the window, and they don't get the exposure balance right. Where you have characters that were shot, even meant to be outdoors, are shot in front of a green screen, and then the foreground background exposure is just wrong. And I think if you haven't done a lot of photography, that you're less sensitive to those kinds of things.
So how important do you think it is then for animators? People are just generally sitting behind a computer to actually get onto a set and to sort of just look around and get a feel for it.
I think it's good to be a photographer animators, I don't know, and that's more about motion. But if you're going to be a TD or compositor, that I think having good experience with the camera and knowing what good composition is, how difficult sometimes it is to get a good depth of field carry between two characters and what realistic fall off looks like. Those kinds of things are all important.
What about some of the challenges that you've had? Pirates of the Caribbean, you and I were talking about that a little bit before, but we were talking about Davy Jones, for example. Tell me about that, about working on that and some of the things that you faced and trying to make that happen.
The approach that we took on that was kind of an outgrowth of what we had done on Pirates 1. Pirates 1, the big gag that we had there is we have these pirate characters that when seen in moonlight, they're skeletons. So the approach that we had taken when we shot that, and it seemed to be the most logical approach, was just to shoot them in their picture costumes, playing the role all the way through, and then as they step into moonlight, we would have very precisely matched animation on them, and we would remove them from the plate and replace them with the CG character. And that worked pretty well, but it was a pain because we had no real good tracking marks on them, and because of the dramatic lighting and shadows, it was often hard to know exactly where a character's joint position was. With these big loose coats and the shadows, the character's elbow could be here, or so really getting a good match was challenging. It was definitely an interpretation on the part of the match move artist. And so when we started on Pirates 2, and Gore had stated very early on that these characters just needed to be CG all the way through. I don't want to do anything with makeup or animatronics or anything. Hal Hickel, the animation director, and I got talking about, well, what's the right way to do this? We had learned also that the best performance happens right on set. If you decided that you wanted to do Davy Jones by having Johnny Depp talking to an empty plate, and then we would come back and do motion capture sessions with Bill Nye to get his half of the performance, that the performance wouldn't be as good. And so we were adamant that, all right, well, we have to make sure that whatever approach we design here lets all this happen on set. So ideally what we want is to shoot them as we did the skeleton characters in Pirates 1, where it just all happens there on the day and in the moment, but we want to be able to get the equivalent of motion capture out of it. And since the characters were going to be CG all the way through, it didn't really matter what they wore, so we could put tracking marks on them to assist this match move process and make it a little more precise and less error prone. And so my challenge to the R&D department was, I want the quality of motion that we get from a full-on motion capture system, but we can't bring all those cameras, we can't bring a ton of equipment, we can't put any restrictions on how we light it, how it's shot, or even where we are. Because we're going to be on the deck of a ship, we're going to be in pouring rain, we're going to be standing in 2 feet of water in the lagoon in Exuma, we're going to be in the middle of the jungle, we're going to be all sorts of very harsh environments, and we can't be too precious about this stuff. It has to be bulletproof. And I can't bring a ton of people. So I put all these restrictions on them, and they came back with this with the iMocap system that we developed for that, and it worked really well. Because I just prohibited so many things, that the system they came up with really was low footprint. It took 2 people on set to operate it. And apart from the suit that the characters wore, it was really very unobtrusive and didn't really slow down shooting at all.
Star Wars, the prequels. When I first saw Star Wars, the originals, it was great, and the effects completely changed me in the way that I wanted to, what I wanted to do. But in terms of opening up a whole world, it was much bigger and much broader. So tell me a little bit about working on that and some of what you came across.
It was pretty overwhelming. Prior to that, the biggest show I had worked on was, I think, Star Trek First Contact. We had about 200 or so effect shots at ILM. So it wasn't, I was not a veteran of really huge shows. And my first exposure to what the work was going to be is I had in November of '96, we had a meeting out at the ranch where George had the entire movie storyboarded. So there were 3,600 storyboards that were all taped up on pieces of 4x8 foam core, and it was 10 across and 10 down, so it was 100 per board. So there's 36 of these boards, and we went through them in story order, and George kind of told us the story of what was going on, in addition to sort of color coding the boards, where he had a bunch of highlighters. He had a blue, a yellow, and a magenta one, and the yellow was I think something that was a real photograph thing, and then blue, he'd use, that's blue screen, so the whole background's going to get replaced, and I think he used magenta for CG things like Jar Jar and the battle droids. And we started going through it, and I'm taking notes about, oh boy, there's a lot of characters in that scene. Are going to need some way of dealing with really dense scenes. Prior to that, I think that the densest scenes we'd ever dealt with were on Mars attacks, where there were, I think, between 15 and 20 Martians in a shot at once, and that brought the whole system to its knees. And here we have shots that have hundreds or thousands of characters in them. So, all right, well, we're going to need a way of dealing with that. And then you look at the all right, now that the Jedi are cutting these droids in half and the pieces are falling on the floor, and or really for the motion to be right on that, we need a rigid body simulator, and we didn't have one yet. So, all right, we're going to need a rigid body engine for that. And then they go down to the swamp, and there's a stampede of all these creatures. And all right, so George, how many different types of creature are there in these shots? Oh, that's I don't know, about a dozen or so. Oh, and is this going to be a location? No, that's just all. We're going to have some mud and some water, and then the rest will be. Whew, okay. And so, I'm writing down all these things as we're going, and it's you barely have time for one thing he's saying to soak in before you're on to the next thing. And I left that meeting with my head spinning, and there were so many areas of that we had no software to deal with. And so the first task was just to kind of identify what are the unsolved problems that we need to get something in place to deal with, and the way you solve big problems is you break them into smaller problems. You break those into smaller problems until it becomes an tractable task for a single person. And it worked out pretty well that way. People came to me kind of alarmed that this is so huge. How are we ever going to do this? And you have to have confidence that we'll solve it. And I kept going back to the thought that this must have been what it was like for the guys on the first Star Wars pictures. Each one of those was an amazing achievement and probably appeared to be impossible on the outset.
Have you ever been given something where after going down that list and trying to break it into smaller and smaller problems, you just said, it can't be done with what we've got?
No, it's not so much that something can't be done, it's how good will it look. There are often technologies that are not really quite mature. You can get something that looks okay, but really where you fall on the quality spectrum is the thing that suffers when either you're tackling something before its time or you don't have enough time to do it well.
So have you recommended to directors who wanted to do something that they probably should try to avoid that because of that, or do you say let's just do it anyway, or how's that work?
Projects that come to us are usually coming to us because we do the hardest high-end work, and it doesn't serve you well to send the clients away. It's only ethical to warn them if they're getting into trouble areas that are going to have a problem looking as real as the clients want. And you have to tailor your approach to what the client's expectations are. Some clients expect a higher level of polish than others and are willing to pay for it. And the whole quality versus cost spectrum is something that really has to be set by the client.
So you mentioned Star Trek First Contact, which is actually one of my favorite movies. But you had talked about that being the biggest project you had worked on up until the next big one. But what do you remember most about it? What was your favorite part of working on that movie?
probably my favorite single aspect of that movie was actually starting the Rebel unit. It was a completely custom-made proprietary pipeline, and it was good at doing the super high-end, but it wasn't particularly good at doing simple things. That we didn't have simple tools for doing simple jobs. And back on Star Trek Generations, I had wanted to do the Enterprise going into warp drive, this sort of stretch effect that we'd done on the television show, but to do it with computer graphics, the smart way of doing it. But everything else in the movie, all the other shots of the Enterprise were going to be with the 6-foot-long motion control model. So we got a bid from the computer graphics department for doing this shot of the Enterprise going into warp drive, and it was so high, I didn't even want to turn it into Paramount. And I thought, there's got to be a better way. And I'd been looking at some of the CG tools that were starting to become available that could work on relatively modest computers. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to try doing that myself. I'm going to do that shot of the Enterprise going into warp drive, and I'm going to build the model, I'm going to texture it, I'm going to light it and render it, and I'm going to do the composite, I'm going to do the whole thing with desktop computers and as an experiment. So I had bought a license of FormZ and Electric Image, and so I built the Enterprise in FormZ, and I was still learning the program, and it took me about 2.5 weeks to get a nice model of the Enterprise D. And then I photographed the stage model of the Enterprise that we had. Got some nice digital stills of it, and I used those to texture it, and brought the thing into Electric Image and lit it and animated it. Put the composite together in After Effects, and actually went really well. The total execution time for doing the shot was about half of what the bid was from our computer graphics department, and I think I could have gone a lot faster if I wasn't learning all the tools at the same time I was doing it. And so that was a very positive experience. And as I went into Star Trek First Contact, we had a limited capacity. I was told that I could handle about 60 or so shots in the computer graphics department. That was about all the man hours we had available. And there was a body of work that I could do with miniatures and relatively straightforward composites. And then that left another body of work, about 40 or so shots that I needed to find a home for somewhere. And so I used up the CG capacity doing things like the Borg Queen destruction and stuff that just had to be computer generated. And I did everything with miniatures that I could do with miniatures. And then the remainder was really this, the bulk of the space battle and a few other assorted bibs and bobs in the film. And I thought, all right, well, let's start up a department that did the same thing that I did on Generations, but let's have a whole department do that. So we recruited some people from the art department and a couple of select people from the computer graphics department who had experience on, in Lightwave on an Amiga and different applications. And we put together this little group to do this work using the same tool set. We used FormZ and Electric Image and After Effects. And it worked out very well. That was the beginning of the Rebel unit. That kind of rolled right into episode 1, and we did a lot of work on episode 1 through that group. And that was tremendous fun. It was ramping up that whole thing, and it succeeded tremendously. A lot of times you can work much faster in commercial applications than you can in the higher end stuff, just because it's better user interfaces. It's more streamlined for doing that sort of work.
Was that your favorite project to date, or do you have something else that you've worked on that you just really loved?
I actually really liked Dead Man's Chest. That was tremendous fun. And Davy Jones was really a wonderful achievement. And crew did such a terrific job, and I saw a bit of it on television recently, and I feel like it still really holds up.